The United States and Iran began negotiations in Pakistan on Saturday. Are these talks real or fake? Is there any substance to them, or is it just for show? Are they useful or useless? Today, I'm bringing you the latest updates on this topic. This is almost a real-time update since the negotiations are still ongoing. While the talks are happening in Islamabad, Pakistan at the same time, in the Gulf region, well, not the Gulf countries, but the Gulf area, specifically in the Strait of Hormuz, there are many developments taking place. So while negotiations are happening inside, there are also actions unfolding outside. There is coordination on the outside. It's like a chess game inside and another chess game outside. So what exactly is going on? Today, I'm bringing you the latest news on this. Also, regarding Trump and about the Strait, let me tell you something. Even if Iran wanted to open up the Strait, it wouldn't be able to. Why? Because they've dropped so many naval mines that even they can't find them anymore. Maybe there are mines drifting all over the Strait. Iran is at its wit's end, so it's basically caused trouble for itself and now can't clean up the mess. So what should be done? Does the United States have a solution? That's the second topic. The third topic is that even if the US doesn't want to profit from war, it's still making a fortune from it. The fact that the Iran conflict is making the US a lot of money is something unavoidable. But whether this is a conspiracy theory or not, whether it was designed by Trump and his friends or not, is another matter. If it just fell from the sky, then that's the third topic I wanted to talk about. Another thing is the CCP. What kind of role is the Chinese Communist Party playing in the negotiations between the US and Iran in Pakistan? I've been telling everyone for 2 or 3 days now. They're also playing another role. This other role is truly, truly malicious. This brings us to the fourth topic I have for everyone. All right, welcome to Good Morning America, brought to you by Fang Wei. Good morning, America. Hello to all our YouTube viewers, and greetings to all the listeners of Sound of Hope, Silicon Valley FM 96.1. First of all, I want to say thank you to everyone for tuning in to Fang Wei's program this weekend. All right, let's get straight to the point. Let's take a direct look at the latest situation. So what's the latest? Here's what's happening. The U.S. Vice President Vance, yes, the Vice President personally led the team, along with the U.S. Special Envoy Vitterkoff and the President's son-in-law, Christina. It's also said that the commander of the Central Command, Brad Cooper, was involved. However, it's possible that he was only originally on the list. In the end, he didn't go, because for the commander of Central Command to go to Pakistan for negotiations would have been a bit too risky. All right, at the very least, we can confirm that Vance, Vitterkoff and Christina arrived in Islamabad, the capital of Pakistan, on Saturday. Yesterday on the show, I said Istanbul, but that was a mistake. There's no Istanbul here. Istanbul is a city in Turkey. The capital of Pakistan is called Islamabad. As for Iran, they sent a large delegation, 86 people in total. So leading the group is Iran's Speaker of Parliament, Ghalibaf, along with their foreign minister, deputy foreign minister, and a national security advisor. In short, the lineup is very impressive. This clearly shows just how seriously Iran is taking this matter. All right, so on Saturday, after Vance arrived, he first met with Pakistan's Prime Minister Sharif. This is characteristic of US-Iran negotiations. The two sides don't meet face-to-face or negotiate directly. Instead, they use an intermediary. That's how the talks hosted in Amman were conducted, and it was the same with the negotiations hosted by Turkey. So it's always a bit awkward. Why? Because that's what Iran demands. This way, they don't have to face direct pressure from the United States. Whatever is said, it's relayed through an intermediary, so they can take their time to think it over and respond at their own pace. So before this round of negotiations, Iran had already set a high price. Let me tell you about these 4 high prices in detail later. One of them was that if Israel did not agree to a ceasefire in Lebanon, then the negotiations would not even begin. They started off with this very high demand, but in the end, as we know, it was just a bluff. They didn't really stick to it, and Israel did not stop its military actions. In fact, in the past 24 hours, the Israeli army has attacked Lebanon 200 times. So regarding Hezbollah's objectives, Iran still did not hold its ground. As a result, after finishing talks with Sharif and Vance, both sides met directly for negotiations. So in Pakistan, this was an exception. They met face-to-face for talks. Of course, you could say that in a certain sense, the President of the United States, the Vice President of the United States, a dignified Vice President, leading the delegation all the way here and still having to negotiate through intermediaries, clearly that wouldn't be acceptable. Anyway, both Ghalibaf and Vance, each representing their respective delegations, met directly and talked for 2 hours, and then there was a pause. Yes, it was a pause, which probably means they would continue the talks afterward. As for the Pakistani representative, the Chief of Army Staff also attended the meeting, acting as an intermediary in the negotiations. Now, according to reports, there are 4 points of contention that they couldn't agree on. The first is that Iran wants the United States to ease sanctions. And the answer from the United States, of course, is that it's not that easy. They'll talk about it once everything else is settled. Second, Iran wants the United States to first unfreeze Iranian assets held in the US and the West, which amount to about $7 billion. The United States said that's impossible, it can't be done, not before an agreement is reached. Third, as just mentioned, Israel's ceasefire in Lebanon is also completely unattainable. Fourth is the issue of control over the Strait of Hormuz. So basically, none of these issues have a solution. And as for Vance, the terms he proposed are completely uncompromising, mainly focusing on two things. First, zero asset unfreezing. Only after all of the United States objectives are fully achieved will we consider unfreezing Iran's assets or granting any sanctions exemptions. Second, immediate passage through the Strait. The Strait of Hormuz must be unconditionally open to all international shipping. While both sides were in the middle of negotiations, news came in from Iran saying that they had detected a U.S. destroyer moving from outside the strait toward the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranian side then informed Pakistan, asking them to tell the Americans that if they continued to advance, Iran would take aim at them. What they meant was that they would attack, though they only used the word aim. So what happened? In the end, the U.S. destroyer was unfazed and continued to move forward. Not only that, but on this Saturday, while negotiations were taking place in Pakistan, several U.S. Navy warships also passed through the Strait of Hormuz. In other words, this was basically a show of force. First, they were saying, we're not afraid of your naval mines. Second, we're not afraid of your missiles or your drones attacking us. We'll just go right through. If you have the guts, go ahead and attack. Can you really hit us hard? But anyway, this is the U.S. directly sending warships through the strait as a show of force. And not only that, on Saturday, several cruise ships also passed through the strait. Obviously, this was under the protection of the U.S. Navy. So basically, the U.S. is demonstrating, saying, whether you open it or not, we can still go through. We can make it through. That's the message. Now, the key point here, the key issue is with Pakistan. What is one of the very, very important reasons why the Strait of Hormuz is not being opened by Pakistan right now? All right, let's talk about this next. Now, as we all know, the Iranian side has actually said, they mentioned that there are certain so-called technical limitations to opening the strait. What does that mean? That's all they said. They didn't go into detail. As a result, anonymous U.S. officials revealed to the media that Iran had hastily used small mine-laying boats during the recent conflict. When laying mines in the Strait of Hormuz, they did not keep a complete record of the location of each mine. Some of the mines, due to design flaws or the way they were deployed, would drift with the ocean currents. As a result, Iran is now unable to accurately locate where the mines it laid are, and Iran itself does not have mine-sweeping capabilities. In other words, they've caused trouble for themselves, and now there's really nothing they can do. Because of this situation, everyone is too scared to move forward, so no one knows exactly how many mines there are. Whether the problem is very serious or not serious at all remains unknown. In short, everyone is too frightened to proceed, and that's the current situation. This is what Iran refers to as a technical limitation. So what should be done? President Trump announced today that the United States is conducting a large-scale clearing operation in the Strait of Hormuz. A media outlet, a conservative new media called News La Nation, had a reporter who interviewed Trump by phone this morning. Trump said that the United States is transporting mine-clearing equipment to the Strait of Hormuz. So I asked him, or rather the reporter asked him, this reporter named Kelly, the reporter asked, is it true that Iran doesn't know the locations of the mines they've laid? Trump said, I don't know. He said he didn't know because this information came from the media. But Trump then added, but we know where their positions are. Really? So, because some viewers have asked me whether American satellites can see where these mines are located. To be honest, I really don't know for sure, or I find it quite unlikely. If you were to ask for my personal view, I find it quite unlikely, but I am hardly a professional expert in the field of satellite detection. So my own opinion is no more valid than any other person's. It is certainly not authoritative. But anyway, Trump said, we know their locations. Trump went on to say, we have the most advanced mine-sweeping equipment in the world. We just need time to get the equipment to the site. As I've reported to everyone before, France has a special piece of equipment for finding naval mines. That little machine, it's not like those big minesweeper ships people usually think of. This small device can automatically sweep and detect these mines. This machine, each one costs 500 million euros. When I wrote about it, some viewers said, you must have made a mistake. Maybe you meant 5 million. How could it be 500 million? But I went to check the original source, and it really is 500 million euros. It's just a small boat weaving around in the water, able to find all the naval mines and even neutralize them. In short, it's a really bizarre thing, but now it's making a huge profit. There are a lot of buyers. And who are these buyers? I think the main buyer is the United States. Because Europe simply isn't coming to clear the mines. So Europe, I don't think they're that enthusiastic, rushing to buy things in preparation for entering the scene in the future. I believe it's the Americans who are buying. But anyway, as Trump said, these are his exact words. We are now initiating the process of clearing the Strait of Hormuz. This is to demonstrate and to provide assistance to many countries around the world. Who are they helping, including China, Japan, South Korea, France, Germany, and many other countries? Trump said, unbelievably, they themselves actually lack the courage and will to do this job. But what's very interesting is that now many countries' empty oil tankers are heading to the United States to load up on oil, okay? Then Trump went on to harshly criticize the fake media. He said the fake media has completely lost its credibility. In fact, they never really had much credibility to begin with. They keep claiming that Iran is winning, but in reality, everyone knows Iran is suffering a crushing defeat, and it's a huge defeat. And now they have nothing left. The only bargaining chip they have is threatening that ships might hit the mines they have laid. By the way, all 28 of their mine-laying vessels are now lying at the bottom of the sea. All right, let's move on to the next topic. The next topic is actually the most important one for today. So what's going on with the U.S. being forced to make a huge profit from war? Trump this morning posted a tweet saying, "Charge, a major victory is coming." What's going on? He said the fake media are either crazy or evil. The United States has completely destroyed Iran's military power, including their entire Navy, Air Force, and all other facilities. Their entire leadership has been wiped out, and the Strait of Hormuz is about to reopen. Those empty ships, he's talking about empty cruise ships, oil tankers, those empty ships are rushing to the U.S. to be filled with oil. But if you listen to the fake news, they'll say we're losing. So Trump sent out another tweet saying that a large number of completely empty cruise ships, some of the largest in the world, are currently heading to the U.S. to be loaded with the world's best and sweetest oil. The sweetest means the highest quality. What does sweet mean? It means the oil flows easily with very little sulfur. The best means the highest quality, low sulfur oil and natural gas. The oil we have is more than the combined total of the next two largest oil economies. He's referring to Saudi Arabia and Russia, and our quality is even higher. We're just waiting for you to come so we can quickly turn things around. Wow, so what's going on? What's really happening? An oil market analyst named Johnston posted on social media at noon saying that satellite images do show groups of empty tankers heading toward the United States. Because the transport through the Strait of Hormuz has been obstructed, causing a shortage of crude oil, all industrialized countries simply cannot afford to run out of oil. They have to buy oil. And where do they go to buy it? There's one place, the United States of America. They mainly go to the Gulf of America, which used to be called the Gulf of Mexico. In the Gulf of America, they load up on oil. Let's take a look at this map, shall we? Our map. See, this shows a continuous flow, these tankers here. Normally, they wouldn't need to go all the way around the Cape of Good Hope in Africa to get to the United States. They could just load up on oil in the Middle East. They travel all the way over here from far away. All right, so now, what kind of oil is this? Let me show you another chart. This chart is about VLCCs on December 10th last year, up to February 8th this year. It shows the number of ships coming to the United States to load oil. Okay, so what does VLCC mean? It stands for very large, what is it? Very large container, sorry. It means ultra-large oil tankers. Each one can carry 2 million barrels of oil. Okay, as you can see, this chart does not represent the timeline after the Iran war began. It only covers the period from December 10th last year to February 8th. To put it plainly, this is the result caused by the Venezuela incident. It has doubled. These are the ultra-large tankers coming to the United States to transport oil. Sorry, the number of ultra-large oil tankers has doubled. So in the past month and a half, this chart doesn't even include that period yet. So it's possible it could double again. So starting from the Venezuela incident, it already doubled. And after that, well, recently, that's how it's been. A shipping and commodities analyst named R.U. Suo, he posted on social media on Thursday saying that U.S. crude oil exports are about to experience explosive growth. In 2023, the United States produced 13 million barrels of crude oil per day. In comparison, the world's second and third largest producers, Russia and Saudi Arabia, each produced 10 million barrels per day. But the U.S. doesn't just produce 13 million barrels. Now, by 2025, it will reach 13.6 million barrels per day. The U.S. also produces liquefied petroleum gas, which comes from shale oil. As everyone knows, when the U.S. extracts shale and uses hydraulic fracturing, two things come out, either oil or natural gas. Both can be produced. So in addition to shale oil, there's also liquefied natural gas. Sorry, let me correct that. Liquefied natural gas, right? When you add it all together, it exceeds 21 million barrels. So it really does surpass the combined output of Russia and Saudi Arabia. Actually, Russia doesn't even have 10 million barrels now. They can only manage 9 million barrels, maybe even less, because they've been constantly attacked by Ukraine. So it might be down to just 7 or 8 million barrels. And as for Saudi Arabia, even though they have 10 million barrels, they can't ship it all out. So in terms of expertise, what Trump said is absolutely not an exaggeration. The oil and gas produced by the United States alone is still greater than the combined total of the second and third largest oil and gas producers. All right, so now we come to a conclusion, or rather a phenomenon. If the Gulf War continues, if the Strait of Hormuz remains blocked, then the result would be that the Gulf oil-producing region is basically rendered useless. While the United States makes a huge fortune, because as everyone knows, industrial production requires oil, globally, fossil fuels are absolutely irreplaceable at present. So when there is no oil, factories can't just stop running, right? Exactly. So we have to find the source. Where is this source? There are only a few places, right? The Middle East, then the United States, and also Russia. Right now, Russia is facing many obstacles in all aspects. So the main source has really become the United States. The US is now desperately selling oil. Over there, everything is blocked. So here they are frantically loading oil. So I think some people might say, is this Trump's conspiracy a deliberate scheme? Is there such a conspiracy theory that by starting a war, they ultimately force all the oil tankers to come to the US? I think there will definitely be people who say this. But is what they're saying actually true? Is not true. If you ask me, it's not true. Why? Because if this really were a conspiracy designed by Trump, it would require several conditions. First, attacking Iran, but Iran doesn't collapse. Second, Iran still has the ability to blockade the Strait, or even if they don't actually blockade it, everyone is too afraid of naval mines to move forward. You know, all kinds of tankers, they don't dare to go forward because they're scared. It's not because Iran can give them some kind of pass. It's simply because they're afraid. So it's all about the unknown. A single tanker is worth over $1 billion. If it gets blown up, that would be disastrous, especially if it hits a naval mine. So basically, everyone is scared. Thirdly, there's also Europe and the East Asian countries are just standing by and watching. You know, the ones who need this the most are Europe and East Asia. In Western Europe, it's a few countries, and in East Asia, it's Japan. South Korea and Taiwan, these are the ones we most need to participate. Of course, without a doubt, China needs oil the most, but none of them are coming to escort the ships. So this is the situation we're facing. Because it's the combination of all three of these factors that has led to a continuous stream of oil tankers coming to the United States. So as a result, the oil-producing regions in the Middle East are paralyzed, essentially paralyzed. Of course, we know that Saudi Arabia still has 7 million barrels a day that can be transported overland. But a significant reduction in production is inevitable. So while the oil-producing regions in the Middle East are paralyzed, people can't just stop using oil, so they end up buying more American oil. As a result, the United States is making a huge fortune right now. Some viewers might say, but ordinary Americans are still losing out, right? If international oil prices go up, won't that be reflected in the U.S. market? The price at the pump, the price of gasoline has already gone up. We all know that, so what can be done about it? You might ask, what does it matter to ordinary Americans if the U.S. oil industry is making money? Actually, it does matter. If this situation continues, I think a certain problem will arise, or rather, a certain phenomenon will occur. The government, like under Trump, will step in to buy oil. The government will spend money to buy oil and then release it at a lower price to the domestic U.S. market. But you might ask, where does the government get the money? Isn't the government running a deficit? Where does the money come from? The money comes from the taxes paid by oil companies. When oil companies make huge profits, they pay more taxes. The government can take some of these taxes in advance and turn them into discounts. These discounts are then passed on to the public, and as a result, gas prices in the U.S. go down. So this method does exist. In other words, when the U.S. is making a windfall profit, of course, there are ways to distribute it, right? So from the perspective of interest, purely from an interest standpoint, the U.S. actually has no incentive to open up the Strait. I'm just putting it plainly. To put it directly, who has the greatest motivation to open the Strait? It's those who need it. The countries whose oil passes through the Strait. The first is the Chinese Communist Party. That's why today negotiations are taking place in Istanbul. No, Islamabad. It's the CCP backing Iran from behind. Both Iran and Pakistan have the CCP supporting them from behind because the CCP is really suffering right now. And what about the United States? In these negotiations, it only has a moral responsibility. It has no interest-driven motivation. As everyone knows, it has no interest-driven motivation. So this peace talk in Pakistan is being pushed by the CCP because the one whose neck Iran is squeezing is actually the CCP's neck. Add to that Japan's, South Korea's, Taiwan's, and Europe's necks as well. Now, what about the United States? As for Japan, part of its oil supply has already started to shift. As for the United States, Europe's natural gas supply has already shifted to a considerable extent toward the US, and now, due to this situation, oil supply is also being forced to increase. Previously, 40% of Europe's natural gas came from Russia, but now it all comes from the United States. The natural gas supply has completely shifted. When it comes to Europe's oil supply, the US used to be in second place, with the Middle East as number one. But after this, the US has become number one again. So now, with each passing day, the United States is increasingly becoming the world's major hub for energy supply. It's the most important hub because the United States has political stability, economic stability, and stable oil production. So once many buyers shift their purchases, they might stay for the long term. They just won't leave. In the future, if you ask, that's simply how it is. So what point do I want to make to everyone here? You all know about the Russia-Ukraine war. I've talked to you before about the Russia-Ukraine war. After Trump took office, he withdrew from direct military aid for this so-called Russia-Ukraine war. That left Europe to fight it out with Russia and the Chinese Communist Party. If you look at it purely from an interest perspective, Trump was sitting on the mountain watching the tigers fight. That's the best way to benefit from others' conflict. All he needed to do was sell weapons to Europe. These are the three major powers, and in the end, after they've exhausted themselves fighting, the United States would be the sole superpower. If you look at it purely from a standpoint of interest, if it were Kissinger, he would probably do exactly that, right? That's the first point. But what did the United States actually do? The United States didn't do that. Trump racked his brains and worked tirelessly, risking everything to try to stop the Russia-Ukraine war. What's the reason? I've told everyone honestly, I don't know if everyone believes me, but I've said it many times. What was Trump's real motivation for desperately trying to mediate the Russia-Ukraine war? It's simply that he didn't want to see people on either side die. It's just that simple. So for him, it was a matter of moral responsibility. Trump is actually a person with strong religious sentiments. Let me also mention this to everyone, because I've actually studied Trump for decades, from his youth up to now. Trump wasn't always like this. He used to be a Democrat and later became an independent. Later, he became a Republican. When Trump turned into what you'd call a very conservative Republican, the conservative Republicans didn't know him at all. So the conservative Republicans have a conference called CPAC, right? It's called CPAC. I often go there to report. Back then, George W. Bush, well, in 2008, I attended the CPAC conference in 2008. There were more than 3,000 people in D.C. early in the morning because George W. Bush was going to attend. You had to get there early or the doors would be closed due to security reasons. So I got up at the crack of dawn and rushed over to attend. Then basically after George W. Bush finished speaking, then he just left. And the people at CPAC, you know what they were saying? They sighed, and said, this Republican president is not their president, not our president. At the time, I was like, what's going on? But later, when Trump came, you know what he said? He said, you finally got your president, you finally got your president. When he said this, the people below didn't understand at all because they didn't recognize him. He was just a businessman from Manhattan. Who knew what he was going to do? So I've always said in 2016, when Trump was elected president, it wasn't because of the Republican Party or conservatives in America. It was the blue-collar workers from the Midwest who elected him. These blue-collar workers in the Midwest used to be the Democratic Party's solid base. Historically, it was only that one time that they switched sides, which is why Trump won. He won the White House. So what am I trying to say by saying all this? What I mean is Trump has always been changing. The older he gets, the stronger his religious faith becomes. Not just that he has faith, but that his faith grows stronger. He has a deep sense of compassion for the world, and his sense of mission becomes stronger. So for some of the policies Trump has made, there are no personal interests behind them. He just doesn't want to see people die. That's why he's desperately trying to mediate the Russia-Ukraine war. Otherwise, he could just fan the flames, since neither side can back down. Because Russia and Ukraine have already fought to the point where both sides are seeing red. No one is going to retreat, right? If Russia wants to keep advancing, the Chinese Communist Party will definitely have to support them from behind, which will drain the strength of both China and Russia. Ukraine can't back down either, so all they can do is turn to the European countries and say, you need to give me weapons and money, right? But those countries don't have weapons, so they just have to buy them from the United States. That's the situation, isn't it? So this is how things are. All right, that's the first point. The United States, even though it could just sit back and watch the tigers fight, is going all out to try to stop this war. That's the first phenomenon in the world. The second phenomenon is the Iran war and the crisis in the Strait of Hormuz. The crisis in the Strait of Hormuz is actually a business opportunity for American oil, but Trump is still putting in so much effort to resolve it, even sending officials to fly to Islamabad to participate in negotiations. So what am I trying to say here? Let me get to my point. The United States is, in fact, truly a moral country. Why is that? Because the predominant Christian faith in the United States has not been completely corrupted. So for a country to be a good country, to have good policies, and to truly consider others, its most fundamental foundation must be its religion. It must have a strong faith. It is only with faith that one can guide their actions to be moral. On top of morality, you then have things like the US Constitution, American public policies, and so on. That is what brings about a prosperous America. As I've mentioned before, I once asked Professor Paul Skousen about the US Constitution. If you take a copy of it and bring it to another country, will it work? He said it won't work. That's not how it is. You must have faith and morality as the foundation before you can establish something like the US Constitution. Only then can it be effective, and you also need education. Strong education, including the involvement of parents, is necessary to pass these ideas on to the next generation. That's the only way to maintain prosperity and lasting prosperity. So it's the same for China and China's future. China must have its own faith, and only on the basis of this faith can it move forward.